Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us, and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
Good morning. Our reading this morning is from the book of Genesis, chapter 33, verses 1 through 11. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 female servants. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and children. "Who are these with you?" he asked. Jacob answered, "They are the children God has graciously given your servant." Then the female servants and their children approached and bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. Esau asked, "What's the meaning of all these flocks and herds I met?" "To find favor in your eyes, my lord," he said. But Esau said, "I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." "No, please," said Jacob. "If I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably. Please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need." And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it. May the Lord bless the reading and the hearing of his word.
This is our last week in our series, Generations to Generations. We've been studying the lives and the journeys of the early patriarchs of the Bible, Abraham, then Isaac, and Jacob. And next week, we're going to take a deep dive in one of Jacob's sons and begin a new series just looking at the life and times of Joseph. I'm excited about the series. We're calling it Living the Dream. So Joseph was a dreamer, so it's kind of a play on words. Anyways, so we're excited about it. But for those of you who've been receiving the daily devotionals by email, I just want to give you a heads up. We're going to take a break, a pause for this week while we're between series. So as we've been studying the early journeys of the patriarchs, we've seen that there's a lot of things passed from generation to generation. There are blessings, virtues that are passed from generation to generation, most notably the covenant and promise of God. That, the patriarchs of the Bible, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, none of them were perfect. All of them were faulted and flawed in different ways, and yet each of them tried to live in covenant faithfulness with God, and even when they messed up, the faithfulness and the promise of God held true. That's the good news. But we also have seen that sometimes negative things pass from generation to generation. Certain patterns of sin, and last week we looked at one particular pattern, the pattern of favoritism and all the hurt and damage that it causes. So this is a basic biblical truth, that all of us have inherited untold blessing from the generations that have come before. That's the good news. But the flip side of that is that all of us have also inherited some form of damage or hurt. And if we're not careful, we'll pass on that hurt, that damage to the next generation. So how do we keep from doing this? How do we break the cycle of hurt and sin in our lives and in our families? Well, the answer is simple, but the process is hard. The answer is forgiveness. And this story we have today, we're closing it with generations because it gives us a picture of what the process of forgiveness can look like. Now, I'm going to rely on a book called The Art of Forgiveness by a pastor named Lewis Smedes. He gives a 4-stage process to forgiveness that I found very helpful. And so just quickly to recap from last week. Jacob and Esau were brothers, and Esau, they're twins, in fact, but Esau came out of the womb first while Jacob was grasping his heel, so he was the oldest. And Jacob and Esau competed for everything, but especially for the favor and blessing of their father. And the thing is that Isaac favored Esau, the older brother, partially because he was older, but partially because he was big and strong and loved to hunt, and Isaac loved wild game, so he delighted in Isaac, and Jacob, meanwhile, didn't receive any of that delight or any of that favor, and so when the time came, he deceived his father. He pretended to be his brother, which I feel like that could be a sermon in and of itself. Like, how many of us pretend to be something we're not to earn the favor of someone else? That's what Jacob does. He pretends to be his brother. He deceives his dad, receives the blessing intended for Esau, and then everything falls apart. So let's take it one step at a time. The first step in Lewis Smead's process is simple. We hurt. Forgiveness begins when hurt has been done, when we recognize and look that hurt straight in the face. Now, it was interesting. Last week I talked about favoritism, and I had so many people who came up to me afterwards to say, well, you know, I thought you were talking about my family. I thought you were talking about my family. Like, everyone could point to some place of favoritism, some experience of favoritism in the past. And for some, it was kind of a joke, something you laugh at because that favoritism has been healed. For some, that favoritism is still very real and very hurtful. One person kind of talked to me, and I didn't realize this. She'd done some work around this in her own life, and she shared with me that, you know, there's a link between favoritism and narcissism. She said, you know, favoritism actually comes from a narcissist parent. And when she said that, I thought, well, that's really interesting and perhaps really true. You know, like the narcissist parent, they really need the love and favor themselves, so that's why they favor one child in order to get. It's really they're trying to feed their own need for favor. And so I ended up looking it up, like I wanted to do some research on it, and it's a whole thing. You can Google it, right? Psychology Today kind of puts it this way. The child who is idealized, the golden child, is determined to remain the manipulative parent's good graces. So he or she continues to serve the parent, while the child who is devalued by the narcissist does everything in his or her power to regain the narcissist's approval and love. Both children clamor to please the narcissist in order to secure their relationship and avoid emotional abandonment. Now, if those words sting at all, they're not intended to sting. It's just, this is a pattern that it happens in a lot of families. And maybe it didn't happen in your family, but maybe you can recognize some piece of it. I've seen it in workplaces as well. A boss who's insecure plays employees off of one another, again, to feed his own need for ego and attention. And I'm not trying to diagnose Isaac, you know, like that'd be easy to do, like, oh, from my armchair psychiatrist, just say, oh, Isaac was a narcissist. I'm not saying he was a narcissist. I am saying, because I do think this is fair and true, that Isaac did grow up as the golden child, and he never had to share his parents' favor or approval or affection or attention. He had it all. And so it makes sense to me that then when Isaac had two children, he didn't know how to divide his loyalty and love. He just gave it to one, to Esau. And then perhaps his wife, Rebekah, you know, maybe out of sympathy for Jacob, or maybe because she had her own need for attention and love, she chose Jacob as her favorite. But the point is, each one of them chose favorites, and they locked themselves into this pattern of hurt in their family. They just hurt. Until finally, Jacob dealt the final blow, the dividing wedge in their family. He did it with the help of his mother, but in one deft move, he hurt both his father and his brother. His brother, he stole the blessing from, and his father, he stole the opportunity to bless his favorite son. That's the hurt. And then the stage two is, after we hurt, we hate. And for Esau, the hate was immediate. The Bible says now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the time is coming, it won't be long now before my father dies, and when he's in the ground, I'm going to put my brother there too. That's the vow he makes. And his anger is so real, so hot, so potent that Jacob knows he is not safe. He doesn't wait around to see if Esau is going to, maybe not follow through. No, he he runs. And I don't know what kind of emotion that Jacob had when he ran. Maybe he had some residual hate. But it seems to me as I read the Bible that whatever hate he once held to his father and brother, it's spent when he steals that blessing. Instead, what takes the place of that hate is enormous fear. Fear that would make him run away from home to an unknown destination. Fear that would keep him there for 2 decades away from home. He was afraid of his brother Esau. Now I'm going to yada, yada, yada over the next 20 years of Jacob's life. I'll tell it real quick. He goes to his uncle Laban. He meets the love of his life, his daughter Rachel. He marries not Rachel, but her older sister because his uncle tricks him. And then he marries Rachel too. In 14 years, he has to work for Laban to pay off the debt. In that 14 years, he acquires 2 wives, of course, but then they kind of get in a competition for his favor, and he ends up with 12 children. And in the process, he tricks his uncle Laban back, and by basically breeding the sheep in such a way that his flocks increase in size and quality and strength and health, and Laban's flocks get weaker and punier and punier and punier, until finally Jacob realizes it's not good to be the favored one. When you are a guest in someone else's household, it is not good to grow your wealth at your host's expense. Because things start to go wrong for Jacob when he realized he's grown too wealthy, too strong. His cousins begin complaining about him, saying he's stolen all of our father's wealth. And then he says, and Jacob saw that Laban, his uncle, did not regard him as favorably as he did before. He was no longer liked. He was no longer safe. And so God told him, it's time now to go home. And that's when we move into stage 3, healing. Time heals all wounds. Hezekiah 4:6. Just so you know, that is not in the Bible. If you want to trick anyone, like Hezekiah isn't even a book in the Bible. He's a king in the Old Testament. But if you ever want to trick someone, quote some scripture and you don't know where it comes from, just says it comes from Hezekiah something, right? So that's an old preacher's trick there. Anyways, but Hezekiah is not a book of the Bible because that's not that truth that we say in our culture that time heals all wounds. That's not a biblical truth. It's never said in the Bible. And we see it in Jacob's life. He has spent 20 years away from home. And in that 20 years, he's acquired 2 wives, 12 children, untold wealth. He is a grown man, but he is not healed. As soon as he faces the prospect of meeting his brother again, he is instantly transported from a man of wealth and stature and strength to a tiny little boy on the run again. And because he can't let go of his fear, he assumes Esau could not let go of his hate. And so as he faces the prospect of going home, he sends messengers ahead of him to let Esau know that he is coming. And these messengers, they say, thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob. Note the lord and servant language there. I have lived with Laban as an alien and stayed until now, and I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, males and female slaves, and I have sent to tell my lord, in order that I might find favor in your sight. You see that word appearing again? He's saying, let me find favor in your sight. Let me know it's okay to come home. And the messengers returned to Jacob, and they deliver to him an unfavorable report. They say, Esau is coming to meet you, and he's coming with 400 men. Now Jacob is really afraid. So he takes his whole party, his whole household, all of his wealth and everything, he divides it into 2 different camps, sends them in opposite directions because he thinks, well, that way if Esau comes and takes half of us, the other half live and survive. He sends gifts, untold gifts to his brother Esau. He sends 200 sheep, 200 goats, 30 camels, 30 donkeys, 50 cows. And he separates all the herds one from another and sends each drove, as separately. And with each one, after each wave of gifts, he instructs the servants, give them the exact same message. Pass ahead of me, put a space between each drove. When Esau, my brother, comes to meet you and says, to whom do you belong? You shall say, they belong to your servant Jacob, and they are present from my lord Esau. Again, is he using brother language here? No. He's using servant and lord, like he's afraid. And when he doesn't know what else to do, he prays. He prays a desperate, honest prayer to God, and he says, deliver me, please, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I am afraid of him. It's an honest prayer, right? For he may come and kill us all, the mothers and the children. Do you see what he's done? He's made his brother into a monster. Someone who would take not only his life, but his whole household, his wives, his children. In his mind, Esau is magnified to this great terror boogeyman that is coming, right? My point is that Jacob is unhealed. He is still deathly afraid. And he will remain unhealed until he faces the sins of his past, which he finally does the night before he meets Esau. And this is what Reagan and Charlie were talking about in the children's home. The night before he met Esau, he sent all of his family, all of his servants, all of his wealth ahead. He stayed in the desert by himself in order to pray and be with God. And sure enough, God came and visited him, just like it happened 20 years before when he was on the run from his home. He had a vision of God, except this vision was not like the one he had before. 20 years before, when God visited him, it was like this vision of angels ascending and descending up and down from heaven on a ladder, and a voice of God giving him comfort and strength. This visitation was a wrestling match, which we can take in kind of two different ways. We can take it literally, that Jacob was literally wrestling with a human, with a human form all night long, or we can take it metaphorically, symbolically, that he was wrestling with his doubt and with his fear and with his past and with his sins. He was wrestling with his own soul. And he held on and he held on until finally in the morning he could let it go. He had to face his fear. He had to face the hurt that he had done. He had to face the hatred that he had earned. And finally, when dawn broke, he released the hold he had on God. And I believe in that moment he released all that fear as well. To me, this is the essence. This is what healing is about. It's letting go. It's letting go of the hurt. It's letting go of the hate. And that sounds easy, just to let it go, but anyone who's really struggled with forgiveness knows it is not. Because it's not a one-time event. You may think, oh, I've let it go. And then all of a sudden something happens and all that hurt and hate just comes rushing right back. And you realize, I got to let it go all over again. I got to forgive all over again. It's hard. I acknowledge it is. But here's the thing, we forgive not because the other person has earned it. We do it for ourselves. I think of myself, I can think of times when I was so angry at someone and I thought I wouldn't forgive them because I was like, I'm going to hold them in the bondage of my hate and my hurt. And you know what? They carried on with their lives just fine. It was me who was eating the poison pill. Lewis Smedes puts it this way. He says, to forgive is to set a prisoner free and then to discover that the prisoner was you. Esau, Jacob had a strange healing, right? He emerged from this struggle with God with a limp. But he also emerged with a new self-understanding because he was no longer at the end of that fight with God. He was no longer Jacob. He was no longer the little runt of the litter. He was no longer the guy who grasped and deceived and hurt his brother. Instead, he has a new name, a new self-understanding. He is Israel. He is one who is striven with God and with humans and has overcome. And he's ready to face his fear. He may still be afraid, but notice what Jacob does after that. He doesn't hide behind his servants. He doesn't hide behind his wealth. He doesn't hide behind his women and his children. Instead, when Esau is coming, he positions himself at the front of his company. He's ready to meet his brother. And then we get to stage 4. We hurt, we hate, we heal, and then we come together. Now, I need to add this just as a statement, that coming together is not always possible, and it's not always necessary for forgiveness. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not necessarily the same thing. And especially if the person is no longer living, that coming together isn't possible. But I would also add, if you are still locked in a struggle, if the other person is unable to acknowledge the hurt they've done, if the other person is unable to express remorse, if the other person is unable to pledge to change their patterns, you don't have to come together with them. Forgiveness does require for you to let go of your hurt and your hate. It does not require you to put yourself in a position where you're going to be hurt again and again and again, okay? So coming together isn't required for you to be able to forgive and heal. However, I will say there is something beautiful about reconciliation because it brings that healing to a completion. That forgiveness, it begins with the self, but it moves into a space where it is given, shared, received. That's when the healing becomes complete. And so if it's possible, let me, just using this story that we read today, what's required for reconciliation? The first thing that is required for reconciliation is vulnerability. Vulnerability. Reconciliation requires trust, and trust makes us vulnerable. It opens us up to the possibility that someone could hurt us again. And so look at what Jacob does. He makes himself vulnerable before his brother Esau. That's powerful in and of itself. The next thing he does is he offers amends. Reconciliation requires amends. It requires an acknowledgement of the hurt that you've done. Now, Jacob does not say, "I'm so sorry, brother, for what I did 20 years ago." Hey, those words don't come out of his mouth. But he demonstrates in all of his actions his sorrow and his repentance, his desire to change. And let me take you back. Remember the blessing that Isaac gave his children. To Jacob, thinking he was Esau, he spoke the words, he said, "Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you." And then to Esau, he says, "You shall serve your brother, but when you break loose, you shall break his yoke from your neck." In other words, he sets up this dynamic that Jacob is Lord and Esau is servant. But what do you see Jacob doing in every message he sends, in every gift? He uses the language of, "You're my Lord and I'm your servant." He reverses the words of his father. Not only does he reverse the words of his father, but when he stands before the company as Esau is approaching him, he bows 7 times to demonstrate, "I'm your vassal, I'm your servant, you are my Lord." He's not making himself subservient. What Jacob is trying to do is he's trying to demonstrate the best of his ability. He's no longer the brother he once was. He no longer needs to be on top. He's not the same person anymore. Phase 3, the relationship is restored. And this is the beautiful part. When Esau comes running up to Jacob. Because while Jacob is bowing down before him, Esau comes running, throws his arms around him, embraces him, weeps. They weep together. There is no parallel in the Old Testament for this kind of reconciliation. The closest parallel we get is from the New Testament story of the prodigal son, which we talked about last week. Except in the Old Testament story, it's not the dad who runs to the prodigal son. In this story, it's the older brother who runs to the prodigal son. And I can imagine when Esau hugs him in that moment, that's his moment where Esau throws off the yoke of his brother. He sets the prisoner free and discovers the prisoner is himself. But then Jacob, for his part, says, "To see your face is like seeing the face of God." This grace, this forgiveness I've received, it's like God's face. It's like God's grace to me. Think about Jacob's journey. He goes from fear to grace, from shame to welcome. How many of us are afraid to face God because of our shame and our fear? What would it be like? What does God's face look like to you? Can it look like grace? And then finally, Jacob makes an offering, a blessing for the future. He amends for the past. He gives a blessing for the future. Esau says to him, I don't need all your gifts. I don't need them at all. And what does Jacob say? No, take them. Take them. He knows now he doesn't have to buy his brother's favor. You can't buy forgiveness. You can't buy grace. But he says, but in response for your graciousness to me, I want you to have these things. And when Jacob speaks to him, he says, please accept my gift, the present that is brought to you. Except the word here in Hebrew is not gift. It's not present. It's barak, blessing. Please accept my blessing. I can't give you back our dad's blessing. I know I took it. I can't give it back. But what I can give you is my blessing. Please accept it. You will know that you have been able to forgive someone, heart and soul, when you are able to bless them, to sincerely pray and desire their well-being before God. Now, I wish I could tell you that they live together in perfect peace always, but that's not the way the story plays out. At the end of this, Esau says to Jacob, hey, let's journey together. Come, join me. We'll go back home together. And Jacob isn't looking for that. He's not wanting their households to be merged again. I think maybe Jacob knows himself. He knows that, like, hey, I don't live in peace with people. I'm one who strives. And if we're all together, we're going to get locked in this pattern all over again. But instead of saying that to his brother, he says, well, no, you go on ahead. I don't want to, I have young children and we have lambs who are with the herd. And if we drive them too hard, it won't be good for them. You go on ahead and I'll meet you. And so Esau travels all the way back home to Seir, which is, if you look at this map here, it's the land of Edom all the way at the bottom. And Jacob settles first at Succoth and then Shecheth, way up north of Jerusalem. They're separated still by hundreds of miles apart. Does that mean that their reconciliation wasn't genuine? No, I think it was. I think they really experienced a moment of reconciliation and peace. But it also says that just because you have a moment of reconciliation, peace, does not mean that you have to be together forever. We can love and bless one another, even if our paths move in different directions. And maybe that's a word some of you might need to hear as well. But let me just repeat the process again one more time. And I want you to reflect on these words. We hurt, we heal. We hurt, we hate, we heal, we come together. I imagine every single one of us has some unresolved relationships in our family, in our neighbors, friends, workplaces. And I just want you to reflect for a moment. Where are you in this process? Where do you need to be? Is it hurt? That you need to face a hurt that happened a long time ago and you need to wrestle with it like Jacob did? Maybe it's hate. It still burns when you think about something that happened to you. Maybe it's not hate, maybe it's fear, shame, regret. But these are emotions. You can't help but feel the emotions, but we have to eventually move through them. We have to eventually let them go. So is that what you need to do? To ask God to help you to let it go so that you can experience healing? Or maybe you've forgiven someone, but you've never been able to express that to them. What would it look like to come together? What message could you send in advance to let them know that you're thinking of them and you wish them well? I'm going to sing a song. This is something I haven't done before in this particular way. Jamelin doesn't even know that I'm doing this, so, without my wife, knowing I was going to do this. This is a song by one of my favorite artists, Andrew Peterson. And I just think these words capture so well the Jacob and Esau story. But I also offer them to you thinking maybe they'll be cathartic for you. Maybe you have a relationship where these are words you need to speak, or maybe they're words that you need to hear. This is, I want to say I'm sorry. I want to say I'm sorry, but I don't know how. I'm sorry, so sorry now. I said some words to you I wish I never said. I know words can kill, something's dead, and now my heart is like a catacomb. I'm praying we can find a way to raise these bones. again, oh, again. I want to say I'm sorry, but it's not enough to close the wounds I've opened up. And now I've got this sorrow and you've got that hurt, and we can't go back to who we were. Oh, but could that mean I'm someone new? Maybe I could love you better than I failed to do. Before the war, they'll tell you everything was beautiful and pure, but there was poison in the well from years before. And now I'm cleaning up this wreckage on the shore, and I don't want to fight with you no more. I want to say I'm sorry that I drew the line. I built the wall, the fault is mine. And maybe now the only way to find some peace is to give it time and trust in grace. So this is my communion hymn. I want to sit beside you at the feast, my friend, again, again, and again, and again.
Good morning. My name is Peggy Reef, and I am the Administrative Assistant here at Zionsville UMC. Thank you for joining us today. We would love to get to know you more and spend some time with you. If you'd like to know more about our faith community, please visit our church website at zumc.org. There you'll find the many ministry opportunities we have to offer. If you need to contact one of our staff members, all of our contact information is at the bottom of each webpage. You can also connect with us via social media throughout your week for daily inspiration and community. You'll find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube under username Zionsville UMC. Once again, thank you for joining us this morning, and we hope you have a wonderful week.